A big loss for the Orlando Magic. The NBA Finals continue, and we get to meet Paolo Banchero with a good friend of ours, or a new friend of ours, in J.J. Jackson. It's a Monday edition of Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is June 6, 2022. My name is Philip Rossman. I'm the expert and site editor over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Of course, follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, we're going to talk with J.J. Jackson of Locked On Blue Devils to learn a little bit more about Paolo Banchero. Of course, you can go back and listen to our guests that joined us to talk about Jabari Smith, as well as Chet Holmgren last week. Today, we take on Paolo Banchero, the last of the big three in this draft class as the Orlando Magic hold the number one pick. So we'll dive in a little bit into what makes Paolo Banchero a potential number one pick, where some of the concerns are, and why some of those concerns may not be as much concerns. As I've said before, I am not here, at least at this point, to advocate for any one prospect. We'll get to that in a little bit, in a few weeks' time here. Right now, we just want to introduce you to some of these prospects as well as talk about them more. We'll dive. Someone mentioned to me, why are we just focusing on these big three repeatedly? Well, these are the kind of the consensus big three. My evaluation of them is that these are the big three, but we will dive into some of the other dark horse candidates, if you will, for the number one pick that we know the Magic like. I talked a little bit about Keegan Murray last week, so we'll dive deeper into him, as well as Shaedon Sharpe later on this week. So we got plenty of draft coverage. We'll talk second round picks and potential late first too. So big, busy draft week for us coming up here. But we got some news to get to before we get to the interview and some things to do as well. First, we want to thank you, though, for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. No matter when you listen to us, we truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day and part of your listening habits. Today's podcast is also brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Before we get into the conversation with JJ about Paolo Banchero, a big event happened late Friday, or at least news broke late Friday, that while it won't affect this year's draft process as much, it's a pretty big deal and a pretty big loss for the Orlando Magic. On Friday, Adrian Wojnarowski was the first to report, and it was later confirmed by Kobe Price of the Orlando Sentinel, as well as later confirmed by The Athletic. The Minnesota Timberwolves are hiring Vice President of Basketball Operations, or I think he's Senior Vice President of Basketball Operations. I don't remember exactly what his title is. Matt Lloyd. Matt Lloyd has been a member of the Orlando Magic front office for the last 10 years. He came over to Orlando with Rob Hennigan, was a very kind of trusted advisor or assistant to Hennigan. And while that probably doesn't make Magic fans feel all warm and fuzzy, Lloyd actually did a really good job from everything that I've heard, all my interactions with him. He is well thought of around the league. As I pointed out, once this news came out, it's a big loss for Orlando because it's someone that has a lot of institutional knowledge about the Orlando Magic, knows what they like, was one of the few Rob Hennigan guys that Jeff Weltman kept on staff. He was named the interim general manager when Rob Hennigan left. That tells you how much the Magic and their ownership group thought about him. And he's someone that's been up for the big job, for a general manager job over the last few years. I do think it's only a matter of time before Matt Lloyd is indeed running a franchise. Matt Lloyd's job with the Orlando Magic was it was listed in the media guide that he was in charge of the Magic's pro, college, and international scouting. Essentially, Matt Lloyd runs the draft. That is one of his responsibilities. He runs all the preparations, gets all the data, all the information, gets it into a form that Jeff Weltman, John Hammond, and the rest of the front office staff, and I'm sure they do it in tandem, it's a very kind of team-oriented thing. He's the one that gets the information to the decision makers so that they can make a decision. Now, do they always make the right decision? Obviously not. But Matt Lloyd, I tell people this all the time. NBA front offices are mini intelligence agencies. Matt Lloyd is super valuable. He's been someone that has been in the front office space, has worked in the NBA since 1996 when he was in a video room with the Chicago Bulls. He worked for the Chicago Bulls front office starting full-time starting in 1999. So he has ample and tons of experience here to have connections around the league, have connections in scouting circles, just to be someone who can help this team make the best decisions possible. A lot of fans came to me and asked, is this timing weird? Is this timing bad? And the reality is this timing is not bad. Matt Lloyd was actually on an episode of Mic'd Up, the Bally Sports Florida podcast, and said, this was a few weeks ago, said essentially that the Magic's draft process is 80% done. They've done all the scouting, they've done all the video work, all those kind of dossiers or whatever, or scouting reports are done. The team has a good sense of who these players are as players. The last step, the last thing that's added in is who these players are as people. I've said this a million times. I will continue to say this. One of the most important parts of this draft process, of what the Magic are doing right now, is getting these players in for interviews, getting to know who they are as people. That's really the last stage of the draft process. And that's really where we're at right now. And again, that's stuff that involves Jeff Weltman and John Hammond. So it starts to hurt when you're starting to prepare for free agency, perhaps, because that would also be under Lloyd's purview, who to target in free agency. Certainly, there's some rumors that the Magic are looking to bring in some international players. There's that one rumor that came out a while back about a player that the Magic were planning to bring in. I think he was playing in Spain, a backup center actually. It's going to be felt elsewhere, and Orlando's going to have to move quickly to kind of fill this spot. I kind of think that they will stay internal, that they'll promote Anthony Parker, who ran the Lakeland Magic, which is again a very scout heavy position. I think that he will come in and start to fill some of those roles. You might have John Hammond drop down and fill some of that role too, until they either find a new hire or they bring someone into the job. Again, Matt Lloyd is one of the nicest dudes in the world. I've had a lot of interaction with him. Just a really genuinely good person. I am personally very, very happy for him that this is the role that he wanted, that he probably pursued, or a role that was an opportunity that was offered to him. And obviously he felt like it was the best choice for him at this moment. 10 years with one NBA team is a really long time. So congratulations to Matt Lloyd. I've left a thought dangling. As I pointed out, after this news broke, Tim Connolly, the new general manager of the Minnesota Timberwolves, is a big-time general manager, a big-time executive. He ran the Denver Nuggets before leaving for Minnesota. He's handpicking the people that he wants to work with here. So on that front, the thought that I left dangling, it is bad that the Magic are losing a really talented and good person, and a trusted person within their front office. It's bad that that's happening. It is good that other teams want the Magic's personnel. It is good that they want that to happen. I told this story on the Orlando Magic UK podcast, Penny for Your Thoughts. I'm a Northwestern fan. I went to Northwestern. Northwestern essentially had the same offensive and defensive coordinator from my sophomore year of college in 2007 all the way to 2-3 years ago, till 2019, 2018. That stability is great. But a lot of us kind of joked, the NFL's come calling for Pat Fitzgerald already. Why aren't other teams, why aren't other organizations, why aren't other people trying to poach our coaches? Why aren't our coaches going for head coaching jobs? Ultimately, as an executive, I think you do want to see the people that you're working with have this kind of growth and kind of take these extra steps and take these next steps. And I do think that this is a next step for Matt Lloyd. And, hopefully we do see him as a general manager or as a president of basketball operations or whatever title they want to give him, where he's actually making decisions. Hopefully we do see that very soon, because it does sound like Lloyd is knocking on the door for that. Orlando's going to have to work to replace him, obviously, and they'll have to kind of find a way to push themselves forward. Before we get into our conversation about Paolo Banchero, we'll dive maybe a little bit more into Game 2 of the NBA Finals on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic. But I would be remiss if I did not at least glance over over the fact that the NBA Finals happened, that Game 2 happened, the Golden State Warriors dominating the Boston Celtics 107-88. The Celtics shooting 15 for 37 from deep, so they're still able to hit a ton of threes. Golden State also 15 for 37, but Warriors just able to shoot the ball a lot better on the interior. That's really, I think, what this series is coming down to. 3-point shooting, both teams are really 3-point dependent. But a big reason why I think Golden State ended up losing that game 1 is they stopped going to the paint. They stopped attacking the paint. Curry was settling for that 3-point shot. He was trying to create for himself because no one else was really doing much. But really settled on the perimeter. I think that really, really hurt Golden State and allowed Boston to come back, who did do a good job attacking the paint, who did do a good job getting in the lane and making things happen. We'll talk more NBA Finals. I'll save that discussion for tomorrow as we look at Game 2 heading into Game 3 on Wednesday. But you want to hear more about Paolo Banchero. He's sort of become the third wheel in this draft conversation. There's a lot of people, I'm still a big Paolo Banchero guy. You'll hear me talk a little bit about him and my thoughts on him during this conversation. He's a guy that I've really had my eye on. I think there's a lot to like about him. Again, I will say this repeatedly. This is truly a 3-person race for the top pick in the draft. All 3 players are certainly good options for the Orlando Magic to take here in this draft. So we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit. We'll talk about Paolo Banchero, really dive into him coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's basketball championship matchup, the NHL Hockey Conference Finals, Major League Baseball, and of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA and UFC to boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Before we get to our conversation with J.J. Jackson, we have an important favor to ask you. We've put together a survey so we can learn more about listeners like you and make your favorite Locked On podcasts even better. This is your opportunity to tell us what you like and don't like about Locked On Podcasts. Go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey right now to get started. It won't take very long, and everyone that completes a survey can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. To take our audience survey, go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey. Thanks again for all your help. And we are now joined by the host of Locked On Duke, J.J. Jackson, to learn a little bit more about Paolo Banchero. J.J., how's it going, man?
Going very well. Excited to get this opportunity to chat about the NBA draft possibilities for Paolo. It's a really exciting time of year. The last decade has been very exciting for Duke basketball with a lot of players that possibly could go number 1, and we'll see if that happens here with Paolo Banchero this year. Thanks for the invite, man.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously Duke has the pedigree. A lot of great picks. The NBA Finals going on right now. Jason Tatum. I think there's been people calling Paolo Thick Tatum a little bit here, because there's a little bit of similarity between their games. But let's start with Paolo before we get into kind of the projections of what he can be one day. What were sort of the first impressions of Paolo Banchero as he was entering Duke and in kind of those early games for the Blue Devils this season?
Yeah, I mean, really impressive start to the season for Duke, and I think it kind of goes back to what I said about over the past decade. You've had this run of somebody like Jason Tatum starring in the NBA, or somebody like Wendell Carter Jr., who Magic fans have grown to know over the past few seasons, where it really is a one-and-done school. Every year you're getting used to an entire new lineup out there for the most part for Duke. And so when you look at Paolo coming in, being a top 5 recruit in the country and now set up to be a top 5 NBA draft pick, obviously this guy is going to be a really good basketball player. And probably what jumped out right away watching the first few games was just how versatile of a basketball player he is. And I think versatility is probably the biggest thing that jumps off the screen when you're watching a player like Paolo. And in the evaluations, that's a word that I've heard a whole lot. It's a word that I was personally saying a lot through the season. As a Duke fan, you felt good because you did have the versatility of your bigs on the inside with Paolo and then Mark Williams as your rim protector. So at the start of the season, really just his ability to do it all, to put it on the floor, to shoot from the outside, to be a great defender, rebounder, all those things Paolo was able to do. And it's not a surprise because he was one of the top recruits coming in, and Duke has had proven success with top recruits turning into good college basketball players and then ultimately turning into good NBA pros.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I watch Duke games, like the first thing that always stuck out to me is Paolo is just bigger than everybody. Again, and he's playing alongside a pretty big dude in Mark Williams, but it was hard not to notice Paolo on the floor, even when he didn't have the basketball. But obviously, I think the big skill that NBA scouts have been looking at, something that I've really highlighted in my evaluation of him, is his ability to just score the ball. It feels like to me, among at least the top guys in this draft class, obviously it feels like the Magic are picking between Paolo, Jabari Smith Jr. of Auburn, and Chet Holmgren of Gonzaga. It feels like Paolo is the best kind of individual scorer, the best give the ball to him and clear out and let him just score. What is the key to his success? Do you feel that way, first off? And what is the key to his success as an offensive player?
100%. I think scoring has been the easiest thing that he's ever done. He walked in scoring, it felt like, to his college career. I think it's just his ability to do so many different things, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and getting to watch the other two prospects a good bit throughout the season. Of course, we had that Duke and Gonzaga game, the head-to-head matchup, and seeing a lot of Jabari Smith Jr. this past season. I thought Paolo was just so great at putting the ball on the floor and finishing at the rim so easily, and wasn't afraid to do something like that. And then throughout the season, I felt like there was more confidence growing in his jump shot. I think when you're a player of his caliber and your whole life you've been the scorer, it's not that big of an adjustment to go to a new team and be the scorer again, because for Paolo, this is just what he's been doing. And then the other big thing with the makeup that I really, really like about Paolo Banchero, and not to slight any of the other two prospects, but Paolo has grown up in basketball. Paolo is from the Seattle, Washington area. You and I are big-time basketball fans. We know that Seattle hooping community is so big. I mean, he's in a gym. He's posting workouts with Jamal Crawford when he's 15, 16 years old. Zach LaVine is someone that Paolo references quite frequently. Nate Robinson is a flag bearer for Seattle Hoopers. I mean, they're just all over the place. And he's been around the game, great players his entire life, playing against those guys as early as 13 years old, guys that are actively in the NBA. Isaiah Thomas, another left-handed point guard to throw into the mix. How can you not benefit from that from such a young age, and to be able to score the basketball the way he was? That's what's just so impressive about Paolo.
Yeah, I mean, again, to me, he just stands out on the court, and I think there's a whole lot to like. For me, like one of the key moments of the season, I'd like to get your take on both this moment and maybe what your kind of key moment was for him. Like a key moment for me was in the game against Arkansas in the NCAA tournament. Duke was up big for a good chunk of that game, and then Arkansas, I remember, cut that lead down to 5, like midway through the second half. And I remember specifically watching that game, and they essentially cleared the floor out for Paolo on 2 straight possessions, and he got them a bucket. And from that point, the game was over. It was just like that was kind of the death nail. And I remember tweeting this and telling, my reader, my listeners, my audience, I don't think it's nothing that in a possession where Duke needed a basket in a big closeout game, they went to their freshman forward and he got them 2 buckets. And I was like, that's, I don't think it's everything, but that's not nothing. Is that kind of, from a day-to-day experience, was that kind of what Duke looked for from Paolo? Just a guy that would settle the offense down, get them a basket when they needed. What's kind of the moment that stood out to you with Paolo, where you were thinking like, oh, this isn't just a really good scorer. This is a guy who could be the number 1 pick in the draft.
I think it's several big moments for Paolo, and certainly that one against Arkansas in the Elite Eight. As you said, it's a 5-point game in the second half, and it's do or die time. Like, your season is on the line. Duke is trying to go to the Final Four. Keep in mind, for basketball fans out there and for people that aren't in the Duke community, you don't see this all the time, or certainly not in the college basketball world, because Duke did get a lot of press this past season. But the fact that Mike Krzyzewski had said before the year even started that this would be his final year, an absolute titan in the sport. Nobody has had more wins in the sport than him. 5 national championships now, 13 Final Fours. When you factor in this past season, in my opinion, the greatest college basketball coach of all time. That's tremendous pressure for 18-year-olds to walk into a setting and to know that everybody's going to be watching you, not only because you play for Duke and you've got this great brand, but because it's Coach K's final year. And in every moment this season, Duke and Paolo Banchero rose to the test, rose to the challenge. And for a Duke team that hadn't won an outright ACC regular season title since 2006, which is pretty crazy to think about because they've had NCAA tournament success and they've had ACC tournament success, just sometimes with freshmen throughout a long season. You've got some clunky losses that pop up throughout the year. That never really happened this season for Duke, to go wire to wire and to win the ACC the way they did on the biggest stage. You talk about the first game of the season, the very first game of the season, you're going up against John Calipari in Kentucky. A few weeks later, we'll get to this a little bit later in our conversation, I'm sure, but we saw Paolo Banchero play Chet Holmgren basically one-on-one in that Duke-Gonzaga game. Paolo rose to the test. Throughout the year, no matter what the stage was, no matter how bright the lights were, he always wanted the basketball in his hands, and Duke was at their best when he was playing his best.
Yeah, and obviously I think it's probably a little late in the podcast to be bringing up his numbers, but the counting stats: 17.2 points per game, 7.8 rebounds per game, 3.2 assists per game, 47.8% shooting, 33.8% from beyond the arc. And I'm sure those numbers don't capture everything about Paolo either. But again, the counting stats are all there. All the numbers are there to say like this kid has it. But obviously, there's a lot that every young player needs to work on. I think there's maybe some criticism about his shooting, some criticisms about his defense. For you, what is the biggest area that Paolo needs to continue improving as he jumps into the NBA?
I would say, honestly, just refining every part of your game. And I don't want that to be necessarily a cop-out answer, but we talked about how versatile he was this season. I don't know necessarily that there is an overwhelming area that it's like, yes, that has to absolutely improve. I mean, if you're looking at comparing the prospects, the shot from the outside for Paolo is obviously the weakest of the three. I think he's well aware of that. So becoming more of a consistent jump shooter, I think, is going to be paramount, but also with his 6'10", 250-pound frame, to be able to walk in immediately day one at the NBA and to not be intimidated by the size of some of the absolute stars in the league, I think is a great thing for Paolo, and I think he's going to be able to go and find buckets around the rim pretty easily. But to highlight one to improve, definitely would probably be refining the outside shot a little bit. I mean, quickness is always something that you really focus on when you join a new coaching staff and that sort of thing. The sports science staff at Duke was so remarkable with Paolo. Just a quick story with the Gonzaga game with so many eyeballs on it, and it actually happened in the Kentucky game to start the year a good bit. Paolo was cramping up, if folks can remember, at the start of the season and really didn't get to play much of the second half at all against Gonzaga. Duke sports science staff was able to find out through research that Paolo loses 7 pounds of weight during a basketball game from water and sweat leaving his body, which is insane. And they were able to help him work on his hydration, make sure he was putting in the correct fluids before games started, during games, and that sort of thing. And so he's already been somebody in his career. I think that's a reason to be excited as well, that when something comes up, he's actively looking for a solution. Fortunately, he was at a school like Duke who could give him those resources to do that. But I'm just fired up to see what kind of a pro he can turn into. We mentioned Jason Tatum a little bit earlier. I love the Thick Tatum shout-outs because I just love Duke basketball players doing their thing out there, and I think Paolo is going to be one of the next ones to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, all three of these top guys are really good players, and the Magic are having to like kind of split hairs to figure out who they're going to take. It is like literally. I tell Magic fans this all the time: don't get into your camps, don't get into teams, don't fight over these prospects. They're all really, really good, and I've had Paolo number one on my board for a long time, and I'll be honest, like I still change my pick hourly. It feels like sometimes, just because all these guys are super, super close. I think one of the the big criticisms that I've seen from NBA draft people when it comes to Paolo is his defense. And I think, I think we saw at times that he can be a really capable defender, but at other times, maybe there's a little bit of relaxing on that end of the floor. And, he's such an important scorer. I don't think Duke was relying on him to defend the best player on the other team. What is your opinion of Paolo's defense, and is this something that NBA scouts should be concerned about?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Like I said, I'm somebody that watches Duke and obviously probably has some Blue Devil tinted glasses on when I'm watching things, which is totally fair. When you look at sort of criticisms for any of the prospects coming out of Duke, I think it's important to keep in mind when you're watching them as opposed to some of the other players. Gonzaga, not necessarily the case as poorly as Auburn, but I know one of the criticisms when you're watching Auburn play college basketball, it's Jabari Smith Jr., then it's Walker Kessler a little bit on the interior, and then it's players that aren't going to see the NBA likely in their professional careers and not as smart of basketball players, so they're being asked to do a whole lot more. For Paolo carrying so much of the offensive load the way that he did for Duke and knowing that he had great players around him, right now Duke's trying to become just the second school ever to have 5 first-round picks this year. Duke's never done it before. It's only happened once over a decade ago in 2010 by Kentucky. But when you've got defensively Mark Williams, the greatest rim protector in all of college basketball, a lottery pick as well this season, I think you're willing to take it a little bit easier because Mark's going to be able to clean it up on the inside. Matchups are always funny when it comes to Duke and some of the teams that they're playing as well because Duke is so big in a lot of the sport in college basketball. You get into some of those games, you're playing against smaller, quicker guards. And so I think that's kind of a way to look at maybe some of the defensive flaws for Paolo. I think they're fair, but I would not have that scare me from taking him because, again, when something came up, he was always quick to make adjustments to what he needed to improve on.
Yeah, and I want to make this clear too. I think whenever I obviously you watch more Paolo, you watch more Duke, you're more familiar with the context than I am. I would watch some Duke games and I'd see Paolo make this incredible defensive play and I'd be like, okay, he has it in them. And then, maybe 2-3 possessions later, he wouldn't rotate, fast enough or wouldn't get there fast enough. And I'd be like, okay, I know you can get there, but it's obviously there's a huge context, like you're saying in there. And again, and this is kind of the next point I want to get to. The NBA is a much different animal than college, both the way defenses play you and the way he's playing defense there. There's obviously no zone defense. There's a lot more kind of complicated defensive schemes. And, even coming to a team like Orlando, he will have good defenders around him, whether he's playing with Franz Wagner, whether he's playing with Wendell Carter. If the Magic keep Mo Bamba, they'll have another shot blocker back there. Jonathan Isaac's still hanging around. You have, Jalen Suggs was a fantastic defender last year. So, getting into a defensive environment and having a culture where, like Coach K is, I'm sure, very into defense as a foundation too. You don't necessarily see the floor if you're not at least capable defensively at Duke. But to that point, the college game is very, very different from the NBA game. I think that's the understatement of the century. Do you feel like Paolo is the kind of player that will succeed more with the NBA spacing that's out there, with not having to deal with the zone defense, with, not having to deal with sort of the congested court, like having a Wendell Carter, Mark Williams is a really good player. I think he's a clear first rounder. I have him. He's probably going to be just out of range for where I'd like the Magic to trade back into the first round to try and get him. But Wendell Carter can step out to the 3-point line. Mark Williams doesn't necessarily have that range. How much more valuable will Paolo become when he gets to the NBA and there is just this, ample space with kind of the 5-out offenses that we see in the NBA today?
Yeah, well, I'll say when you're looking at the 3 prospects that we talked about, the floor and the spacing in college basketball didn't deter Paolo necessarily offensively whatsoever. He made it work. So I think he's obviously going to be able to do that at the NBA when you're exactly right. Watching those games, the spacing is unbelievable. And when Paolo is so comfortable with the ball in his hands, driving to the rim, finishing, we saw him throw lobs to Mark Williams throughout the years. And you're mentioning all the bigs that are there and would love a lob coming their way. That Paolo to Wendell Carter Jr., a Duke to Duke connection would be outstanding to sort of watch and see. So I think absolutely he's going to benefit from a larger court. You think about another big difference that folks discuss, college basketball to the pro game. There's clearly a 6-second difference in the shot clock when you're watching the sport, so it's going to be quicker. Guys are going to have to be more reactive, and I think that benefits ball handlers and drivers more because they got to be quick, and the defense has to be quicker to set their feet and get in the way. So I think that definitely spacing will be an added bonus, a benefit for Paolo's game going to the next level. You agree?
Yes, no, I completely agree. I mean, I say this about pretty much any big time prospect. They have no clue how much space they're going to be getting in the NBA compared to college. Like that, even like the narrower lane in the college game
Right.
is just like cramps everything. And like this is no offense to people who enjoy college basketball, but like as an NBA guy, sometimes I find it really difficult to watch college games because it's just like there's just like no space for these guys to move. It's just like it's hard. Like I know I'm watching games with an NBA perspective, and so I'll watch like Paolo on a mid post up and there will be a help defender already kind of shading over to him, and he'll be within shouting distance of his man already because the space on the floor is just so congested. And obviously the 3-point line's closer in, so everyone kind of sets their offense a little bit closer in too. And so just, having the potential to say run a pick and roll with Paolo and like Markelle Fultz, like Wendell Carter is going to be pushed out to the corner or pushed out to the short corner. That's going to give Paolo a lot more room to dive to the basket. Fultz is, again, no offense to Duke point guards, but
Sure.
Markelle Fultz can squeeze the ball into the tightest window possible. Like he will find you if you are open on a pick and roll. And so like the spacing is, he's going to benefit so much from the spacing. Like I'll admit I was a little bit low on Jason Tatum coming out of Duke, and the kind of the lesson that I learned there is like you can't trust college spacing so much. Like Tatum didn't have the room to operate that he has in the NBA right now, and obviously we've kind of seen how Tatum has skyrocketed. Just making that, it's obviously easy to make comparisons between two guys that went to the same school, kind of ran the same system, but to that point, is Paolo a guy that will show more as he gets to the NBA? Is there a Duke player, or is there someone that you would compare him to from his time at Duke, looking ahead to now preparing for the NBA?
Yeah, I love that question because when you were talking about sort of the benefits of going to the NBA game and not necessarily seeing what you're seeing on the floor, we've talked a lot about Tatum. We've given some love to Wendell Carter Jr., clearly playing there for the Magic. But the other name that comes to mind, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, kind of what you were thinking when he was coming out to be drafted compared to where he's at now. But the player that Brandon Ingram was at Duke, to then going to be a top 3 pick at the association and now being a star for the Pelicans, like that's another guy that played in the same system as Paolo Banchero, that was surrounded by more NBA players that are still playing in the league. Duke had a lot of back and forth that year with Brandon Ingram, Grayson Allen, Luke Kennard, who were all doing their thing, starting for their NBA teams. And for Ingram to take the next step the way that he has, like Jason Tatum, being more comfortable with the ball in his hands at the next level. Obviously, the very first thing to put out there, the body structure of Brandon Ingram versus Paolo is very different.
A little bit different.
Very different. But that's just another name in recent memory within the last. I'm telling you, it's a one and done factory at Duke. We got a lot of these guys to put on.
That early 2000s reputation that Duke had of having these really great college teams, but just not able to produce NBA players, like that reputation is dead. Like honestly, like I think a reason to pick Paolo Banchero is this long line of really good Duke kind of big forwards.
Right.
Jason Tatum, Brandon Ingram are great examples of those kind of guys who thrived in the college game. I think they do play very similarly. Like I see some people, and I'd like your take on this. I see some people call Paolo a big, like a 4-5, and I'm just like, no, he's a 3-4. I want him out on the perimeter. Like, yeah, put him in the mid post, put him in the low post. Like I think he has really good footwork, and I think he has a really smart. I think if a smaller defender's on him, drop him in the post, and I think he's going to be able to score on him pretty easily. But he's someone that I think can work facing up. Sort of like I view him, I don't think he's as gifted as a scorer as Carmelo Anthony was in his freshman year at Syracuse, but I view him as sort of that kind of player where you stick him in the mid post, kind of clear out the floor, maybe create some cutting actions, and see what he can do. Because we haven't touched on this yet. You've touched on it a little bit, but Paolo Banchero is a much better passer than I think he showed at Duke. The numbers don't show, I think, how good of a passer he is, and so I think you could do a lot with him with the ball in his hands.
Absolutely, and I think you're exactly right with what you were saying there and talking about Paulo's passing ability. I think it will improve. You'll see more of it. That was one of the frustrating pieces to critique Duke's season this past year. Oftentimes in games they didn't play as well, immediately on Locked On Blue Devils, we would talk about, well, what were the assists compared to baskets made for this team at the college game? And when you've got so many guys, like I said, trying to have 5 first-round picks this season, guys want to get theirs. They want to get their shots. Sometimes the ball can slow up a little bit. But when you talk about Paolo going to that 4 or 5 slot as opposed to being a bigger wing out there, you do not benefit from kind of putting a cap on Paolo and saying, stay close to the basket, make things happen that way. That does you no good as an offense, as an NBA team. He's truly going to be at his best when, yes, you ask him to do some of those things, great. He's going to fare pretty well. He is 6'10", 250 after all, and he does score very well around the rim, but you get more out of letting him have the basketball in his hands, getting you into some offensive sets. It doesn't have to be a ball hawk and do this every single time, but you do need to have him outside on the wing a little bit more to let him make plays.
Yeah, like I think the Ringer comparison to Julius Randle, I'm just like they're nothing alike. Like those are not the same two players in my book, or at least that's how I would use them when I got there. Obviously you watch Duke every single day. Like I pop in maybe for a big game. I've watched a fair amount of Paolo Banchero, but like I'm popping in for a big game, NCAA tournament, ACC tournament, those kind of games. What's something about Paolo's game that you wouldn't necessarily see, or that you see and saw develop day to day, game to game, that we wouldn't see if we're just popping in for a game here or there?
That's a good question. And it's kind of wild to think about, having, again, the Duke Blue Devil goggles on that people aren't consuming.
No,
this every
leave them
day.
on. Let us know.
And the thing is, too, with that, I mean, at a school like Duke, you're on television pretty much every single night. So people are always watching your games and what's taking place there. Really, what impressed me the most about Paolo was just his ability, honestly, to be more confident in himself as the season progressed. And not necessarily that he was shy in confidence at all, but I think when you're put in an environment like that, where this clearly is not high school or AAU basketball anymore, where you really are with elite players playing for a legendary coach who, as I said a little bit earlier, says, I'm walking away from the sport after 42 years, and Coach K has his last ride, his last dance, his swan song, to have all those eyeballs on you and to still be more and more comfortable as the season progressed, to be more versatile offensively, to show off the passing ability, to step up to the test. Every single time there were doubts about Paolo, and we saw it in the game against Gonzaga in Las Vegas. You cannot watch that first half of basketball and walk away saying without a doubt that Chet Holmgren is the better basketball player, because when they went head-to-head, Paolo won. In every way you look at that, he was the more comfortable player in that setting. JJ, that's only 20 minutes of basketball. Okay, fair, but that's the only 20 minutes of basketball that we have of them sharing the same court, kind of going at it one-on-one on that big of a stage to walk away with that opinion. He never shied away from a big moment, and that continued to be the case throughout the season, all the way down, as we're just talking about, to the Elite Eight, winning against Arkansas, and the season comes to a close in a heartbreaking fashion against your biggest rival in North Carolina in the Final Four, but you walk away from that one, and Paolo was one of your best players on the floor all night long. So certainly wasn't his fault.
They probably would have won that game if they could have gotten him the ball a little bit more in the second half, and that was the most frustrating part of watching that Final Four game, because that was that he was having a really special tournament, obviously. Before I let you go here, we've talked a little bit about him. I don't know how much you've watched of him lately, but we do have a Dookie on the Orlando Magic, a pretty big one, a guy who's really developed into a core player. But I was curious what kind of your perspective is on the way Wendell Carter has grown here in the last year and a half with the Orlando Magic. Obviously, he struggled a little bit to find his rhythm with the Chicago Bulls. What has been your thoughts on how Wendell has developed? Is he now becoming the player that you thought he would be even when he left Duke?
Absolutely. I love Wendell Carter Jr. I'm one of his biggest fans. Watching him play is so exciting. You mentioned kind of playing with big-time players at Duke like we've done this entire conversation. That 2018 season for the Duke Blue Devils, you've got Wendell Carter Jr. alongside Marvin Bagley III, a Duke team that made it all the way to the Elite Eight that season. That's really hard to kind of figure out, how do you make these two bigs work? But the glimpses that we saw at Duke and the spacing limitations, again, that you've got in college basketball, you could just kind of be smart and figure out, okay, Wendell Carter Jr. clearly has this shot from the outside, very unique lob threat, really good rebounder and defender in the college game. I think he's going to be a pretty good pro. And now he's gotten this opportunity in Orlando with the Magic. I see him sporting goggles from time to time, which is a different look than we saw at Duke.
God, he got poked in the eye a few times, and they were like, "Nope, you're goggling up." And he despises those things.
I can only imagine.
Any opportunity he gets to destroy a pair of glasses, he is destroying them.
But no, it's been so much fun to watch him throughout his NBA career, and I'm excited for the opportunity that he's gotten there in Orlando, and so I can't wait to see what he's able to do over the next few seasons.
Well, JJ, I want to thank you for taking the time to come chat with us a little bit about Paolo Banchero. Given Magic fans certainly a lot to think about, as I'm sure Paolo is going to give the Magic a lot to think about when he eventually does come to Orlando for an individual, at least, interview. I don't think he'll be working out because that's just how the NBA works these days. JJ, tell everyone where they can find you if they want to learn a little bit more about Duke.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. Don't forget those underscores. There are a lot of JJ Jacksons walking out around there. But I've got Locked On Blue Devils every single day, everything Duke basketball. Football season right around the corner. Not as great for Duke fans. That's why we talk basketball so much and have such a great community. For NBA fans out there, I'll go ahead and let you know that while Coach K is walking away from the sport, Duke, once again, is welcoming in the #1 recruiting class in the country with the top 3 players in the sport coming into the college basketball sphere. So we're going to be having similar conversations again next year about Duke one-and-done prospects. Hopefully from the Magic perspective, you're not worried about it as much because you have a better season and you don't need to worry about that #1 pick. But yeah, check us out at Locked On Blue Devils every day. And Philip, I can't thank you enough for the invite here.
Yeah, absolutely, and don't worry. We will still gladly take a Duke guy in the teens. They're just as good there as they are at the top. And again, we didn't get into it here, but I would definitely say the Magic would be in the hunt for Mark Williams if he slips down. I don't think he'll be there in the 20s, which is where I'm kind of targeting for the Magic to trade back up. I think Trevor Keels is a very real option for the Magic at 32 and 35, if not to trade up into the first round and get him. So there are plenty of good Duke players to grab here in this draft. I want to thank JJ again for coming on. You can, of course, find me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. Subscribe to Locked On Magic, as well as Locked On Blue Devils on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, all the fun places to download podcasts to your podcast-enabled listening device. And for the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can find us there on Twitter at OMagicDaily. For JJ, this has been Philip. We want to thank you again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. For JJ Jackson of Locked On Blue Devils, as well as myself here at Locked On Magic, thanks for listening. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.